So Mark, one of the things that I do with my business owners, or I am doing, is we talk about a book called The E-Myth by Michael Gerber. And I tell my business owner clients that there are two people that I know that actually took that book and executed it to its limit. So everyone I know, there's so many great business books out there, and most of the business books that we get, there's a couple gems and we apply them, and that's what I did with the E-Myth. I'm like, oh wow, this is really good. I've got a couple gems, and I applied them, and I moved on, and most of my friends did. But there were two business owners, you being one of them, who actually took that book, said, wow, I like this, and you executed it 100%. And the other person I know that did it, very similar to you, is now sitting on top of a business that they really don't have to spend any time in at all. Now, you said you work 4 hours a day, and most of that's by choice,
don't
right?
tell anybody at the office that.
Oh, okay. Shh. Can you tell me, first of all, what inspired you about that book, and then how you went through the process of executing it, maybe why you went through executing, anything at all?
Sure. I read the book probably 15 years ago as part of a book suggestion during our
group.
business owner group. And when I read it, I'm very process oriented. So immediately when I read it, even though there was just myself and my partner, that's all that we had at the organization, but something resonated with me about the book in terms of just the simplicity of the processes, holding people accountable. It just really made a lot of sense to me as I read through the book and the processes and the suggestions that it made. And being that I was at the absolute ground level of a startup, doing everything myself along with my partner, what I began to do is writing down all the work instructions of everything that I did. And then from there, I began putting it on basically a website. Fortunately, I do website programming as well. So I was able to put the whole thing together into a website that's basically an intranet within the organization. So in the organization, you can look at it by job scope, by duty, there's reference information, whatever you need. It's all sitting in one location. You can pull all your forms, all the work instructions for anything that's done there. It all sits on this intranet. So what I would do is I would go through and write up the instructions and the processes and everything that I was working on. And then when finally, after about 1.5 years, we hired our first person, I was able to take what I had been able to now write in terms of work instructions and began training that person on those work instructions. And from my perspective, it's very important because it really minimizes mistakes, because instead of doing it verbally, it's very clearly laid out. That person, and you can go, if a product has a problem on the back end, I can go and say, you forgot to record the date of the analytical, or the date of the analysis, for example. And that's part of the work instruction, so there it is in writing, and then you make the employee more aware of something that they forgot, how it affects the back end. You use it as a teaching moment, but really the fact that you're able to lay everything out in that sort of a process makes it very easy to train people and very easy to hold people accountable. Because typically, if you're not training them with work instructions and in that fashion, the typical response is, I didn't know it was supposed to be done that way. Yeah.
I have a question for you, and I don't know if this is going to be different because your company may be different than other companies, but I have a sneaking suspicion that it's not. And that is that a lot of people I talk to about work instructioning their whole businesses, they talk about how important the customization is and how important, the creativity and the work with the client. How have you managed to have an entire business that's sort of run on this foundation of systems and practices, but still be creative and still be,
Well, I think to a
personal.
certain degree, everything we do is custom made. So a customer, they give us their requirements, and then we build their product basically around their request or requirement. So inherently, we do batch manufacturing. We're not a big process where we're just process manufacturing something. Everything that we're doing is custom made. So in that, even though you have the work instructions and you have to hit the certain key points, every day, everybody within the organization is not only making a different product every single time, but there's a different set of what's important to the customer that goes along for the ride as well. So what I do is, you have your work instructions, but I empower the employees that you're the one who's going to make the decisions on how you're going to go about making the product. And there's certain parameters that are written into the work instructions to make sure that they're kind of following the guidelines, but it's up to the employee at that point to creatively come up with their own way to put that product together. And we have a QC process so that once the product's manufactured, it then goes through a second check in a QC process so that we can make sure that what the customer ordered and what the person thinks they made is in fact what was actually made. So we have a check and balance there. So we give them the creativity, and some do really well with it, others not so good. So then you start seeing, well, who's pretty good at this and who's not. And maybe the person who's better at it, okay, we'll give them a little bit more freedom. The person who may not be so good, we want to have them a little bit more structured. So it also helps you kind of make calls in terms of personnel and where they spend their time.
So even with the complexity of your business, even with the fact that, yes, it's a manufacturing company, but there's so much custom work to it. Even the fact that it requires a lot of intelligence. I mean, you have PhD chemists at your company.
Correct.
You're still able to use the very simple processes that the eMyth does, and you see that as one of the keys to your success as a business,
yes,
right?
Absolutely. Yeah, I don't see how I could have the number of employees with the complexity of the product. I always say my product is a lot of simple things. The problem is, and what makes it so complex, is there's 5,000 simple things to do. And if you miss one of them, it's critical to the product. If you miss one of them, because it's in the scientific arena, if you make one mistake, that costs you. And we sort of have a rule of thumb that we use in our company, and one is every minute you spend doing something is $1. So if you can shave time, that's $1 savings per minute. And the other thing that we always say within the organization is that every mistake, it costs us $500, because we might ship this product overseas. Rarely is it just going in the local market in California. We have distribution accounts throughout the world. So if one of these things goes out and it's incorrect and we have to reship it, it's going to be at least on average a $500 mistake.
Wow. That's good. I like the way you quantified it, because you made it very, very clear. And it seems like that's what the systemizing and processing your business does. It really does make things clear. But in your case, it really supports the creativity, it really supports the high level, and it allows people who are highly skilled to be free and creative in their work if they have the capacity, but it also gives you a safety net for people as they're learning.
Right. It reduces training time, it reduces mistakes, and the other great thing about it is constantly my employees refine the processes, find improvements, find areas where they're able to save additional time by making some tweaks on the work instruction, and then when they do, we rewrite the work instruction based on the new parameters.
See, I love that too, because in the beginning I always thought, well, I have to come up with my system, but because I'm always redoing my systems, then maybe I couldn't use something like this. But I realized, and I also heard from one of Michael Gerber's films, that it's a process of continuous improvement.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Put on that.
I probably have the work instructions about always 80% done, and there's constantly 20% more that I'd love to do, but I'm constantly making improvements and changes on the other 80%. So it's fairly time consuming, but it's well worth the investment to me.
Excellent. So those of you who are listening, who are business owners, and you feel swamped and overwhelmed by all your processes, keep this in mind, because the systemizing your business process is probably one of the keys to becoming financially independent, but also getting a lot of free time so that you can enjoy your life, which is a lot of the reason why a lot of us have businesses, so we can do that.